Keanu Reeves was sitting in a McDonald's in Los Angeles, enjoying a rare moment of calm. It was a quiet afternoon, and the sunlight was pouring through the windows, casting soft, warm light over the restaurant. Keanu had just spent the day at a charity event, helping out with children who needed support. After a long day of working for a good cause, he wanted nothing more than to relax. So, instead of heading straight home, he decided to stop at a McDonald's near the busy avenue. He didn't need anything fancy, just something simple and familiar. Keanu, known for his down-to-earth personality, dressed casually in a black t-shirt and sunglasses, hoping no one would recognize him. He wanted to experience a normal day for once, away from the hustle and bustle of being a famous actor. It wasn't often that he could enjoy such a quiet moment without the constant attention of fans or the media. As he entered the McDonald's, he tried to blend in, not drawing any attention to himself. The familiar smells of fries and burgers filled the air, reminding him of simpler days. Families sat together, laughing and chatting, while children ran around, their voices adding to the cheerful noise of the place. Keanu walked up to the counter, ordered his food, and found a seat by the window in a quiet corner. With his phone turned off, he wanted to enjoy a break from everything, even if it was only for a few minutes. He could watch the world go by, the busy street outside and the busy restaurant inside. It was one of the rare times he could just be himself, without the constant spotlight. As Keanu started eating his meal, he noticed a little boy sitting at a nearby table. The boy was staring at him, his wide, curious eyes fixed on him as if trying to gather the courage to do something. The boy had messy blonde hair and wore a faded blue shirt. In his hands, he held a broken toy car, clutching it tightly to his chest as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Keanu couldn't help but smile at the boy. He seemed innocent and shy, his little face filled with curiosity and wonder. But Keanu didn't think much of it at first. He went back to eating, occasionally glancing at the boy who was still staring at him. At the same table there was an older man sitting across from the boy. The man was tall, wearing a sharp suit, and had a cold, stern look on his face. He was on his phone, barely acknowledging the boy beside him. With every little movement the boy made, the man would glance at him with an annoyed look, like the child was disturbing him. The boy, it seemed, was trying not to get in the way, his small body stiff and his eyes focused on his broken toy car. Keanu watched the scene, sensing the tension between the boy and the man. It was clear the boy was nervous, and the man didn't seem to care much about him. The boy appeared to be uncomfortable in his presence, but the man seemed unfazed, his attention fixed solely on his phone. Keanu couldn't help but feel for the boy. He looked so small and helpless in comparison to the cold, powerful figure of the man next to him. After a few minutes, the boy did something unexpected. Slowly, he climbed down from his chair, still clutching the broken toy car in his hands. His eyes never left Keanu as he took careful steps toward him. Keanu could hear the soft rustle of the boy's footsteps on the floor as he approached. The restaurant felt quieter all of a sudden, as if the world had slowed down just for this moment. When the boy reached Keanu's table, he stopped. His eyes were filled with a mixture of fear, determination, and hope. He leaned in toward Keanu, his body trembling slightly. The boy was about to say something, but his voice was so quiet, Keanu could barely hear him. He leaned closer to listen, his curiosity piqued. What the boy whispered to him next left Keanu momentarily stunned. But before he could react or say anything, the moment was interrupted. From across the room, the man at the table noticed the boy was missing. He stood up suddenly, adjusting his suit jacket with deliberate movements, and walked briskly toward Keanu and the boy. Keanu instinctively straightened up, trying to remain calm. He could feel the tension rising in the air as the man's gaze locked on him, his expression cold and dangerous. Keanu could tell something was wrong, and he knew that this encounter would turn out to be more serious than he initially thought. The man approached them with slow, purposeful steps. His presence was overwhelming. There was something unsettling about him, like he exuded control and authority, as if he was used to getting what he wanted. When he reached Keanu and the boy, he stopped a few feet away and gave Keanu a thin, forced smile. His words were polite but held a sharp edge. "Sorry about this," the man said. "Gavin can be a bit overly curious sometimes. I hope he hasn't been bothering you." Keanu remained calm and gave a polite smile, trying not to show any sign of discomfort. "No, not at all," he replied. "Actually, he was just showing me his toy car. Looks like it's broken. He must really love it." The man's smile faltered for a brief moment, his eyes narrowing. "Yes, he's quite attached to it," he said, his voice tight. Then he turned to the boy, Gavin, who was still standing beside Keanu. "Come on, Gavin. It's time to go." But Gavin didn't move. Instead, he stepped back a little, hiding behind Keanu, his small hands clutching the broken toy car even tighter. He didn't say a word, but his actions spoke volumes. He didn't want to go with the man. Keanu noticed this immediately, his heart going out to the boy. The man's expression turned darker. He seemed more frustrated now. "I appreciate you keeping him entertained," the man said, his voice growing firmer. "But we have somewhere to be. Excuse us." He reached for Gavin's arm, trying to pull him away from Keanu. But Keanu wasn't about to let that happen. Without saying a word, he gently placed his hand on the man's shoulder, stopping him from grabbing the boy. "I think Gavin needs a moment," Keanu said calmly, his voice steady. "He seemed to want to talk to me about his car. Maybe we can figure it out first?" The man, clearly not used to being challenged, froze for a second, then let out an annoyed sigh. Just as he was about to speak again, the waitress who had been watching them approached, holding a tray of drinks. She gave Mr. Darren, the man, a suspicious look before addressing him. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her voice tentative but firm. Keanu smiled at her and nodded. "Yes, everything's fine," he said. "Actually, could you bring Gavin a drink? He looks like he could use something." The waitress hesitated for a moment, then nodded and walked away, casting one last wary glance at Mr. Darren before she left. As soon as she was gone, Keanu took out his phone and quickly typed a message. He knew he had to act quickly. Whatever was happening with Gavin and the man was far more serious than it appeared. Keanu could sense that something dangerous was going on, and he needed to get help before things escalated any further. Mr. Darren, noticing Keanu's actions, stepped forward, his eyes narrowing with anger. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said in a low, threatening tone. "But this has gone far enough." Keanu smiled again, but this time, there was no warmth in his expression. "I'm just trying to help a boy who seems to need someone to listen," he replied, his voice steady but firm. "I'm sure you can understand that." Gavin, still clutching his broken toy car, finally spoke. His voice trembled as he said, "I don't want to go. Please, can I stay here?" The words hung in the air, making everything feel more urgent. The boy's plea was simple but powerful. Mr. Darren paused for a moment, his face hardening. His eyes locked with Keanu's, and for a moment, there was a silent standoff between them. Then Mr. Darren's expression turned colder, and he said, "I suggest you don't get involved in something that's none of your business." Keanu stood his ground. He knew he had to be careful, but he also couldn't let this boy go with someone who clearly didn't have his best interests at heart. Keanu pressed send on his phone. He had already sent a message for help. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't over, and he needed to stay alert. Mr. Darren's cold stare lingered on Keanu, and the actor knew the situation was far from finished. Things were about to get much more complicated, but for now all he could do was stand firm and protect Gavin as best he could. Keanu thought the air in the restaurant felt heavier, even though there were many people talking and laughing. Keanu was standing between Gavin and Darren, and he could feel something was wrong. Gavin, a small and nervous boy, was holding a broken toy car tightly against his chest like it was a shield. Gavin's eyes were locked on Keanu, full of fear. Keanu crouched down so he could talk to the boy in a soft voice. "You can tell me what's going on." "I'm here to listen," Keanu said gently. Gavin looked around nervously, checking if Darren was still watching them. Darren was sitting at the table with a phone in his hand, staring at them like he was waiting for something. Gavin held the toy car even tighter and took a small step closer to Keanu. He whispered, "He did something bad to my mom. Can you help?" Keanu felt a shock when he heard those words. He could hear the fear in Gavin's voice, and he knew this was serious. Keanu didn't ask more questions. Right now he just needed to help Gavin. Keanu looked the boy in the eyes and said softly, "It's okay. I'll help you. I promise." Gavin nodded, but the fear didn't leave his eyes. He looked back at Darren, like he was afraid Darren knew what he just said. Darren noticed them talking and got up from his seat. He walked over to them slowly, his smile didn't reach his eyes. He was getting angry. "Sorry to interrupt, but Gavin and I are leaving now." "Thanks for keeping him busy," Darren said as he reached out to grab Gavin. Before Darren could touch him, Keanu stood up and blocked his way. Keanu was calm, but his expression made Darren hesitate for a moment. "He's still talking about his toy car. I think he wants a few more minutes," Keanu said, staying in front of Gavin. Darren looked annoyed. "That's very kind of you, but he's with me. We have an appointment." Keanu didn't move. He kept standing in front of Gavin and said, "Kids need time to talk. I'm sure you understand that, right?" Darren stared at him, looking angrier, but then he seemed to calm down. "Of course, but we don't have time to waste," he said. Then he looked at Gavin, who was hiding behind Keanu. "Let's go, Gavin. It's time to leave." Before anything could happen, the waitress came over. She put a folded piece of paper on the table where Keanu was sitting, pretending it was just a napkin. Keanu picked it up and read it quickly. It said, "The police are on their way." Keanu felt relieved, but he knew they weren't safe yet. Keanu smiled at Gavin to reassure him, then looked back at Darren. "Why don't we sit down for a moment? It looks like Gavin just needs a little time to breathe. Sometimes kids just want to be heard." Darren gave Keanu a cold look but nodded reluctantly. He went back to the table, but his eyes were still on Keanu and Gavin. He was muttering into his phone, looking more upset with each passing minute. Keanu knew he didn't have much time. He had to protect Gavin and figure out what was going on. After a few moments, Darren hung up the phone and stood up again. He adjusted his jacket and looked at Keanu and Gavin with a darker, angrier expression. "You have no idea what you're getting yourselves into," Darren said as he started walking toward the door. Keanu knew this was a critical moment. He had to be careful. Darren was walking slowly toward the door, but his every move seemed planned. Keanu watched carefully, knowing that any wrong move could make things worse. Gavin stayed close to Keanu, holding his toy car tightly in his hands. The room was quiet except for the soft sounds of people talking. When Darren reached the door, he stopped and pretended to fix his jacket. But Keanu saw something strange in the way Darren was moving. He wasn't just adjusting his jacket. He was looking around like he was figuring out what to do next. Darren reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He typed something quickly, then put the phone away and went back to the table. The waitress came over again looking serious. She quietly whispered, "The police are just 2 minutes away. Stay calm." Keanu nodded without saying anything, keeping his eyes on Darren. Darren was sitting again, but now he looked more tense. He kept checking his phone. Keanu could tell that Darren was worried about what was happening, or he was trying to take control of the situation before the police arrived. Darren smiled and said, "You seem very interested in our conversation, Mr. Reeves." Keanu didn't change his expression. He just looked at Darren and said, "Gavin looks scared." Darren laughed a little, but it wasn't a real laugh. Kids have active imaginations. They make things up. You know that, right? You deal with stories all the time in your job. Keanu stayed calm. "Maybe, but kids are also more honest than adults. They say what they feel, even if they don't always know how to explain it." Darren leaned forward, crossing his arms. "Then why don't we let Gavin decide? Gavin, do you want to leave now, or do you want to stay here and keep talking with our friend?" Gavin looked at Keanu, then at Darren. His hand tightened on the toy car like it was giving him strength. Finally, he said in a quiet voice, "I want to stay here." Darren's smile vanished for a second, and he clenched his fists. But then he relaxed and gave a fake smile. "All right, but I hope this doesn't take much longer." As Darren sat back down, the waitress returned. She brought a glass of water and slid another note under the glass to Keanu. He picked it up and read it. "They're 2 minutes away. Stay calm." Keanu knew he had to keep talking and buying time. He turned back to Gavin. "You said your mom is hurt. Do you know where she is now?" Gavin started to answer, but stopped when Darren slammed his hand on the table. "That's enough questions, Reeves. This is none of your business." Keanu stayed calm and looked at Darren. His voice was steady, but there was a lot of power in his words. "If she's hurt, then it's everyone's business. Especially mine." Darren leaned forward again, his eyes locked on Keanu. Keanu was staring at Darren, and he could feel the tension in the air. Darren was a dangerous man, and Keanu knew it. He had seen people like him before. Darren was threatening and scary, but Keanu wasn't afraid. He stood tall and made sure that Gavin, the young boy, stayed close by his side. Keanu kept his eyes locked on Darren as he spoke in a calm but serious voice. "You don't know who you're dealing with," Darren said, his voice full of anger. Keanu didn't flinch. He just continued to watch Darren. "If you want to talk, we can do it peacefully," he said. "But if you want to leave, we can wait for the police." Darren stood still for a moment. His eyes darted around the room, realizing that things were starting to slip out of his control. He had thought he could handle this, but now he wasn't so sure. Outside, 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of the restaurant. The sirens had stopped, and the officers stepped out of their cars with a serious look on their faces. 2 officers, a man named Ramirez and a woman named Vega, quickly walked into the restaurant. Darren saw them and immediately stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. He glanced at Keanu and said, "You've made a big mistake, you know?" Keanu didn't say anything. He stayed calm, standing protectively beside Gavin. Gavin was still holding Keanu's arm tightly, trembling from fear. Keanu quickly knelt down to Gavin's level and whispered gently, "It's okay now. The police are here to help us." Darren quickly fixed his jacket, trying to act confident, but there was a look of irritation in his eyes. He turned his attention to the officers who were approaching. The officers were very serious. Officer Ramirez spoke first. "We got a call about a potential issue here," he said. "Is everything okay?" Darren smiled, trying to hide his fear. "Everything's fine, officer," he said, his voice smooth and calm. "There must be some misunderstanding. I'm just here with my son, enjoying our day." Before the officers could ask more questions, Keanu stepped in. He rose slowly, making sure to keep Gavin close by his side. "Officers," Keanu said, "I think you should hear what the boy has to say." Ramirez turned to Gavin, who was looking down at the floor, feeling nervous. Officer Vega crouched down to Gavin's level, giving him a warm and kind smile. "Hi there, I'm Officer Vega," she said gently. "Can you tell me your name?" Gavin looked up at Keanu for a moment, seeking reassurance. Keanu nodded and gave him a little squeeze on his shoulder. Gavin finally spoke softly. "Gavin." Vega smiled again and said, "It's okay, Gavin. Can you tell me what happened? We're here to help." Gavin looked from Vega to Darren. Darren was staring at Gavin now, his expression turning from calm to angry. "Don't say anything, Gavin," Darren said sharply. "We're leaving. Now." Gavin was still very scared, but with the officers there, he started to feel a little braver. He finally looked up and spoke in a small voice. He hurt my mom," he said. "And he said no one would help us." The restaurant fell completely silent. Everyone was listening now, and Keanu could feel his heart break for the boy. Ramirez and Vega exchanged glances. They could see the truth in Gavin's words. Keanu crouched down beside him again, trying to comfort him. "You did the right thing, Gavin," Keanu said softly. "We believe you." Darren's face grew darker with anger. "This is ridiculous," he sneered. "He's just a child. He's making things up." "My lawyer will love this," Darren said as he tried to push past the officers and leave. But Officer Ramirez stepped forward and put a hand on Darren's chest, stopping him. "I think you should stay where you are, sir," Ramirez said firmly. "We're not going anywhere until we understand what's going on." Darren's eyes flashed with anger. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he spat, trying to walk away. But Officer Vega was quick. She grabbed Darren's arm and held it tightly, not allowing him to move. Ramirez stepped in to help, pinning Darren in place. "Are you resisting a police order?" Vega asked, her voice calm but serious. Darren muttered angrily, but there was nothing he could do. The officers quickly put handcuffs on him. Keanu stayed by Gavin's side, trying to keep him calm. Gavin was still holding on to Keanu tightly, but the boy's face showed signs of relief. Darren was being taken away and Gavin felt a little safer, though still shaken up. Darren was taken outside to the police car, still muttering angrily. "He's lying," Darren said. "None of this is true." Keanu turned to Gavin. "Do you want to show me where your mom is? We can go there now and the police will help," Keanu asked gently. Gavin nodded slowly, still holding his broken toy car tightly in one hand. He grabbed Keanu's hand with the other. "I just want her to be okay," he whispered. Keanu's heart ached for the boy. He knew they needed to move quickly. He turned to the officers. "We need to go to his house now," Keanu said urgently. "Gavin's afraid to go home. He's worried about his mom." Officer Ramirez nodded. "We'll follow you," he said, writing down the address on his notepad. Officer Vega crouched down next to Gavin again. "Gavin, can you take us to your house?" she asked kindly. "We're going to make sure your mom is okay." Gavin hesitated. He looked at Keanu for reassurance. When Keanu nodded, Gavin gave a small, timid nod in return. "I can show you," he said softly. "But he always locks the door. I don't know how to get in." Keanu put a comforting hand on Gavin's shoulder. "Don't worry. We'll figure it out," Keanu said. Before they left, a restaurant employee came over to Officer Vega. Darren left a backpack at his table, the employee said. "He probably forgot it when he rushed out." Vega picked up the backpack and brought it over to Keanu and Gavin. She opened it to see if there was anything useful inside. Outside, Darren was still shouting from the police car. "You're making a huge mistake. I'm innocent. You don't have any proof." Ramirez ignored him and helped Keanu and Gavin into the police car. As they drove, Keanu tried to keep Gavin calm. "Did you know that toy cars are easy to fix?" Keanu said with a smile. "Once all this is over, I'm sure we can fix yours." For the first time, Gavin gave a small smile. Though his eyes were still sad, he felt a little better. "Do you think my mom is going to be okay?" he asked quietly. Keanu looked at him and smiled warmly. "We're going to do everything we can to make sure she's okay," he said reassuringly. As the police car drove closer to Gavin's house, the atmosphere grew heavy with tension. The street was unusually quiet, and the windows of the house were dark. Officer Vega noticed that the front door of the house was slightly open. She quickly pointed this out to Ramirez, who immediately stopped the car. "Stay here," Ramirez ordered Keanu and Gavin. "We need to check things out first." Keanu nodded, holding Gavin's hand tightly. The officers got out of the car, guns drawn, and approached the house cautiously. The silence around them felt threatening, more dangerous than any noise. When Ramirez reached the door, he slowly pushed it open. Inside, the house looked like a disaster. Furniture was overturned, and there were broken objects all over the floor. It was clear that there had been a struggle. The officers moved carefully through the house, making sure it was safe. Then in the living room they found Hannah, Gavin's mom. She was lying on the floor, unconscious. There was a small cut on her head, but she was still breathing. The officers immediately called for paramedics to come. As the paramedics worked on Hannah, Vega and Ramirez went through Darren's backpack. They found a notebook inside with detailed notes. The notes showed that Darren had been spying on Hannah and Gavin, keeping track of their movements. He had planned to kidnap Gavin and take him to another state. This was big. It meant that Darren had been planning to hurt them even more. The officers now had everything they needed to charge Darren with abuse and attempted kidnapping. Outside, Darren was still sitting in the back of the police car, watching everything. He muttered more threats, but Keanu didn't pay attention. He was focused on Gavin and Hannah. Gavin was holding Keanu's hand and asked softly, "Will you stay with us? I don't want to be alone." Keanu smiled gently and said, "I'll stay with you until everything is okay." The next morning, Hannah was in the hospital, resting. She was still hooked up to machines, but the doctors said she would be fine. Her injuries weren't severe. Gavin was sitting next to her, holding her hand. Keanu was standing nearby, watching over them. The doctor came in with good news. "She's going to be okay," the doctor said. "Her injuries weren't serious. With rest, she'll make a full recovery." Gavin breathed a huge sigh of relief. He looked at Keanu and smiled shyly. He was happy his mom would be okay. A few days later, Hannah was discharged from the hospital. Though she was still emotionally shaken, she was very thankful. Before they left, Hannah turned to Keanu with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You saved our lives." Keanu smiled warmly. "I was just in the right place at the right time," he said. "The real hero here is Gavin. He had the courage to ask for help." Gavin smiled shyly and held up his now-repaired toy car. Keanu had made sure it was fixed, as a reminder that even broken things can be fixed after difficult times. Keanu was inspired by what happened. He decided to do more to help people who had been hurt by people like Darren. He reached out to a group that supports victims of domestic violence, offering money to help them. He also stayed in touch with Hannah and Gavin, making sure they had everything they needed to start rebuilding their lives. A few months later, Keanu was invited to a special ceremony. The police wanted to honor Gavin for his bravery in asking for help and saving his mom. At the ceremony, Gavin gave Keanu a drawing. It showed a boy and a man holding hands. The words, "My hero," were written in colorful letters. Keanu smiled and said, "You're the real hero, Gavin. Asking for help takes more courage than anything else." If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. I'll see you in the next video.